Hey, this is John from Alloy 211. Today's video is on the WCB World Class Blades Hellhound OTF 100% assisted opening pocket knife. Now, depending on your local laws and regulations, a pocket knife like this may be prohibited or restricted. So before trying to acquire a WCB World Class Blades Hellhound OTF 100% assisted opening pocket knife, make sure that they are not a restricted or prohibited item in your area. About 2 months ago, I had some knife blanks to trade. I took them into the local gun knife show, and a knife vendor who also makes knives offered me this knife in trade for the knife blanks that I had. Now, I'd actually been looking for a while for an OTF style pocket knife, and I'd looked at Benchmades and Microtecs, which are really nice knives, but they are also prohibitively expensive, at least for me. And what I'd noticed about a lot of these knives like this is that anything that is not a really nice one tends to just be more like for novelty. And I don't really want a novelty knife when I was younger. You know, maybe fantasy knives when you're younger, kind of cool, things like that. But once you get a little older, if it's not an actual working knife, then what's the point of having it? So I'd looked at a lot of these of the what you call medium end, I guess. And a lot of them did not impress me. They all seemed like they'd wear out. Now, I'd looked at these before I took this on trade, but I hadn't really decided to buy one. But since I got it on trade, I was more than happy with it. Well, I mean, of course, you're trading something for it rather than paying for it. Now, I did see a knife similar to this made by the same company on Gunbroker for about $80. So in the $80 range also, I'm not going to say this is a bad knife. Now, one of the things you'll notice right away, if you compare this to, say, the Benchmade or the Microtech, it's a lot heavier. It's got a heavy alloy handle. But if you compare this to, say, some of the lesser knives like this, it's got a very strong spring and a very tight action, really. This particular one has a D2 steel blade. I opted for this fully serrated blade. One of the reasons why I did that is because this is a left-handed carrying knife for me. So since I'm carrying it in my left-handed pocket, it's not my primary knife anyway. That would be my Benchmade right here, which that's kind of funny to say primary knife. But this is just a knife that I've carried forever. I've always carried a knife in my right-hand pocket. I've not ever really carried a knife much in my left-hand pocket. Also, one of the reasons why I kind of opted for this style of knife, because that way, this is the kind of knife that you can use one-handed no matter what. So, anyway, like I said, I've had this about 2 months. As you can see, since I had it by the camera earlier, I'll show you again. The finish is starting to wear off of it a bit. This is just a soft alloy handle, but it does seem pretty durable. The handle itself has not gotten any sort of deformation, but the finish is wearing off. But that's kind of okay, because if you look at the blade kind of has that sort of a washed finish. So another reason why I opted for this D2 or the serrated blade is the D2 tends to be hard to sharpen. So at least in other tool steel knives that I've encountered, it's hard to sharpen. I've not really had to sharpen this yet, so that's a good thing as well. Has a glass breaker here on the back if you ever need to break glass with your knife. I've never had to do that, so maybe other people do. I mean, if you were a first responder, I could definitely see that being useful. One of the things I will say is if you purchase this knife and say mostly you open boxes and things like that, it is going to get gummed up with adhesive, especially if you don't keep a thin kind of coating of oil on the blade. So if you are primarily opening boxes, honestly, I would say, one, avoid this altogether. Maybe just get yourself a utility knife. But even if you would prefer to have a pocket knife than a utility knife, get something like this that you can easily clean out, easily clean the blade. You don't really have to worry about gunk locking it up, because it pardon me, if you get adhesive down in here, it will get locked up and you will have to take it apart, which luckily is not that bad. And that's another thing with some of these knives. I've taken some of these lower end knives apart like this and they were a nightmare. You pull off a side and springs just go poof, like that. It's kind of a cool little magic show, like where'd all those little springs come from? But then in the same stroke, it's trying to put all those little springs back in. So we're gonna go ahead and pull this open. Now, I'm using a bit out of my very old Benchmade blue box, which if you take a lot of knives apart, buy a Benchmade blue box. It's got all the little tips you need for most knives. So at least I've not really encountered a knife I couldn't take it apart with it. And Pardon me again. You'll notice I'm not actually using the blue box driver insert, because when you do that, it tends to put your torque off center, and especially with these little tiny screws in this alloy handle, I really don't want to offset their torque at all. You know, I don't want to cross thread them in any way. And that is something you definitely are going to have to watch on this. So, and you don't really need a handle on it either, because they don't need to be torqued in that tight. Nice magnetic tip here. Take these out. And these are actually as tight as I had them that I'd normally carry. If you wanted to, you could probably put some Loctite on there. I wouldn't myself, but that's just because I do a lot of maintenance on my knives, so I don't like to Loctite things together that I'm taking apart regularly. Also, I will say though, you don't really want to take this knife apart regularly, because it is a soft alloy handle, and these are steel screws. They will eventually wear the threads out if you're not careful. Okay, now this is normally the moment where you kind of go, ah, you know, when you take a knife like this apart, because you're worried about springs going everywhere. But, haha, well, okay, the button fell off, but spring is nicely self-contained right here in this one unit. You have one single spring, you have a hook in the back for the back of the blade, and a hook in the front. Now these are just, see if I can show you here, there you go, just looped over the end of that, like a so, and like a, oh, I'm glad I didn't push that off, and like so. Now I'm not going to pull that off of there because I don't need to, so I don't want to do that. Here is the back of your action bar, and here's the front, and while I have it up here, I'll show you, it's got this nice little milled out area here that interacts with these flappers. You have a flap at the rear and a flap at the front. They kind of act like a little sear. So in the back, when the flap goes in, and push it, pardon me, push it forward, and if you notice, it actually catches up here on the top on each one of these little rings, and then all the way to the front, and boom, now I can't go back in, although it could come shooting out. But on the other side of the handle, I have this nifty little piece right here that interacts with this stud and keeps it from coming out. So it's a really simple design. I was really impressed with this design when I took it apart, honestly, how simple it is, but yet how reliable it is. Now, you'll probably want to put some oil down in these channels. I like to use a light oil, like a light gun oil, not thick gun oil, just a light gun oil. Now my guns, I actually use a little bit of a thicker oil than that, but in my knives, I like to use the thin oil, just because I want to, you know, kind of avoid gunking them up. Now, like I said, I'm really impressed with this design. I really like it. In the 2 months that I've had it, I have used it extensively, because I'm not used to carrying a left-handed knife, and not a left-handed knife like this. So I've been wanting to practice a lot, so I make sure I'm up on using it. So I would say I've actually had it in and out of my pocket probably twice as much as what you would expect in that normal time period. So I'm kind of impressed with how well it's held up. You know, it's one of the things with the finish. Yeah, the finish is a little worn, but it's been in and out of my pocket a bunch. There is one thing though. The button is also made out of the same soft alloy that the handles are made out of. And something I noticed, let's see if we can get a good shot of those. Maybe. Now, let me adjust the light. There we go. And there we go. As you can see, the steel portion right here has begun to cut into the button. Now, how far it cuts in there, I don't know. It really could probably wear all the way into the rest of the button and still function. And you can always flip it around, but I would definitely say at some point I will probably need a new switch. So that is my only complaint, but at this price point, as that's my only complaint, I really can't really even call that a complaint. And not only that, the fact that it is so easy to disassemble, if you did need to change that part, it really wouldn't be that difficult. Okay, now that we've gotten it kind of back together, I mean the blade, like I said, if you want to take the blade out, push down on that, blade comes out. You want to put the blade back in, push up on that, and back in. So I'm going to go ahead and move it forward just a bit. I find it easier if you disconnect it from this back block, which I'm not going to pull those out. It's a pretty simple procedure, but you don't really need to pull those out, and unless they were really dirty or you saw gunk in there, I wouldn't pull them out because they seem like a fiddly bit that would be a pain in the butt to get back in there. So I would recommend cleaning it out, visually inspecting it, make sure there's no dirt in there, but I wouldn't take it out unless I had to. But I mean, that's your call. It'll be your knife. Okay, when you reinsert this bar, it tends to help if you just take, kind of tip it downward, which kind of hard to tell what I'm doing there. Tip it downward. So that way that milled edge catches the flap. And then this just sits right down, right into the blade. There you go. Now that that's in place, go ahead and put your button, get up by the camera here. Go ahead and put your switch, I guess it's not a button, it's a switch, back into place. It's just got a little bit of milled out area here, both sides, that this ridge fits into. Now since I have it apart, I'm going to go ahead and flip it around and put the unused side there. And that is a nice thing, it is the same, so you can just flip it over. Now I'm going to take this side plate, put it back in place, and then it'll just click, click, click. Put it down. Now I'm going to go ahead and set the screws back in. You really, really, really want to make sure you do not cross thread these in any way when you put them back in. Because I would say that's the biggest deficiency you will find with this, is that if you have to take it apart much, you will wear out the threads if you're not careful. And again, I'm not going to put a lot of torque on these, just enough to hold it together and make sure they're not going to loosen up. But they don't need to be super tight. And I like to torque things in a pattern. I don't necessarily think you need to, but it's just my way of things. Do this one. One more. And there we go. All back in. There we go. And then whoop, hit it against the table. And there we go. Good to go. It is, overall, it is about 8 inches long. 5 inches closed with a 3 3/16 inch blade. And in 2 months of having it and using it and pardon me, practicing with it, I can't say it's a bad knife. I think it will hold up compared to, say, the more, say, a Benchmade or a Microtech. Maybe it won't hold up as long. I think it'll definitely need servicing at some point before a knife like that would. But I think the blade and the handle overall and the system is a good system. And I think if you're looking for a more budget-minded knife of this nature, that this is definitely the way I would go. Now, if you can afford to just buy a Benchmade or a Microtech, then maybe go that way. But even if you're going to buy one of those, if you just wanted to have something like this to carry around and beat up, I think this would be a great knife for that. Anyway, if you liked the video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button. If you watch some of my other videos and you enjoy those too, I'd really appreciate if you subscribe. So thanks and have a good day.